the worry of that would have me say, you know what, I'm not gonna. I'm 45 years old. I'm continuing in this cycle still.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be able to. I don't have anything to offer anybody.
Right. So you need to end it. Are you saying it got to a point where you were just like thinking about ending it?
Definitely suicidal.
Wow. All right, guys, this is another installment of the Enter the Mission podcast. I'm here with David Leimbach. He's a recent graduate and a ministry intern. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, George.
Hey, man. So generally how we start this thing is I'll ask you kind of what brought you to Brother Brian Mission. So if you kind of give us a little bit of a summary of that.
A complete brokenness. I have gone through my life in a very sick cycle, a sick, self-destructive, suicidal, no point in living life.
Wow.
Started at a very young age, a broken home, from place to place. That pattern continued to go. But at a very young age, I remember just being away from home and wanting a way out.
Yeah.
And that continued.
Gotcha.
Eventually led me to prison. I ran the streets most of my teenage years.
Yeah.
At an early age. And by the time I was 20 years old, right when I celebrated my 20th birthday, I went to prison for 10 years for armed robbery.
Oh, wow. Wow. So you had 10 years in prison, got out, and what happened after that?
I dove straight into the workforce, like a workaholic, because that's where I found my meaning.
Solace.
Yes. Okay. And my dad was in the grocery business, and I went into the grocery business. Having an armed robbery charge, you're not going to get a job just anywhere.
Right.
You're not. So I went to work at 30 years old bagging groceries. I was a bag boy.
Okay.
But I felt really good about myself in a worldly manner.
Sure.
My dad kind of set the tone for that.
Yeah.
But I knew this was all I was going to have, so I grabbed it by the horns and I completely invested in that.
Okay.
Spiritually, I tried church from the beginning, but they were not receptive to me. It wasn't a relationship that was easily built. I actually went to a church that had me feel very as much of an outsider kind of.
I got you.
Especially
it's very hard to connect, and
yes.
for whatever the reason that they had. Okay. And so you kind of worked, and then when did drugs start entering back into the equation?
Well, 10 years I went. I had a substantial run, 10 years, completely working, a couple of relationships that I invested in because I've tried to find my worth in a woman, immediately. And being set apart from the world, obviously I wanted to be with a woman, that was major to me. And I wanted to feel love. I wanted to feel acceptance in that. So a couple of relationships, and one substantial lasted 4.5 years, but ended with me having a son. She took him and left, and I haven't seen him in about 10 years. And those couple of relationships that failed, and me continuing to make bad choices.
Yeah.
I mean, I was continuing to make, even though I'm not, doing things that I used to do. I wasn't robbing people or any of that.
Yeah.
I was still making bad choices.
Sure. Bad choices are bad choices.
That's right. That's right. So that until I was about 40, 41, 42, my spiral started. After I had that broken relationship with her and was no longer able to see my son anymore, that it did something to me that sent me kind of over the board. And more failed relationships with women.
Sure.
I continued to try, but more failed relationships. And one of them, she was using meth. I didn't know that when I first met her.
Yeah.
But then I started using meth with her.
I got you.
And that relationship obviously
off to the races.
Right.
Yeah. And so you were telling me a little bit about like a crack run that leading up to coming to Brother Brian, right?
Yeah. So with social media these days, it can become an addiction just like a drug.
Sure.
And social media had me meet some people, and I got back into the drug game.
Yep.
Cocaine. Ended up in some different places throughout up north, and some friends that I started indulging in selling cocaine, and then I started using myself. It was the first time I'd ever used crack, but I started smoking crack.
Wow. So what happened that caused you to want to come to Brother Brian? Kind of came to a head, I would assume.
Yeah, I would, over about 4 or 5 years, I would go to and from these different places. Okay, I've got to get it right. And I would stop. And
like a roller coaster.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when I would go to try to get it right. I have been in the grocery business. I did well.
Yeah.
But then I would go to the grocery business, and because of things that I had done, like relationships and things like that, the inappropriate relationships with women at work and stuff like that, I had sort of created a bad reputation, even with just myself.
Okay.
So it made me insecure in the workforce.
Sure.
And I would always reflect back on that. I've been doing a great job, but I would wonder, well, if people check your work history and things like that, what do they find out? Yeah.
So your sin's following you.
Yes.
It's like hanging on you.
And so, the worry of that would have me say, you know what? I'm not going to, I'm 45 years old. I'm continuing in this cycle still.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be able to, I don't have anything to offer anybody.
So you need to end it. Are you saying it got to a point where you're just like thinking about ending it?
Definitely. Suicidal.
Wow.
And that's what would have me smoking crack.
Sure.
Times that I have smoked crack had been on this death mission.
Wow.
I wanted to die.
Yeah. And I've heard similar things like that, about guys getting to a point where they're literally trying to get high to death.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I would starve for weeks at a time.
Yeah.
Like I might eat every 3-4 days.
Sure. Yeah. For that often. And so you find yourself in this point where you just can't get out of this. You're wanting to die. You want a radical change. And so how'd you hear about Brother Brian?
When I first started this cycle at about 42 years old, I came back to Alabama, and I said, I was homeless. I needed a place to go.
Yeah.
I looked it up online, and this place was one of the ones that popped up.
Okay.
And I had just enough gas in my gas tank to get here.
Okay.
So this is my second time around. The first time around, I left after about 2.5 months.
Okay. So this time you went into orientation, and so how'd that go? What did that look like?
So I had this idea, because of my previous exposure to the Bible and things like that, that God would do this transformation in somebody's life, that it would be nothing of my own doing. And at 45 years old, I had that very experience that there was nothing I could do for myself.
Right.
So coming into over and over and over. And so at this time, I came in and I said, I could get all my work done with what is the gospel and live free. I could do all the paperwork. Yes. And I could hand it in and go ahead and phase up.
Sure.
I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go through the program from start to finish, everything that the program offered, with hopes of receiving what God will do for me in my life.
You weren't trying to cut any corners.
No,
like, I want the long.
This is going to happen, or it's
experience.
not. I want the real deal,
Yeah.
And so I invested in the things that were offered from the beginning. What is the gospel? Within what is the gospel, I understood the basic components of what Jesus did for me, what God did for me in the form of Jesus to come down and save a man.
Yes.
And
so the atoning sacrifice of Christ, the power of God for salvation for those who believe, you're saying that impacted you?
Tremendously.
Tremendously.
I never knew, when we speak of Corinthians 5:17, he made him who knew no sin to be sin. 5:21. Yeah. So I didn't ever understand what that meant.
That concept of atonement.
I think to myself from the beginning, when we talk about dying for my sins, you're dying for my sins.
Yeah.
Now I have the understanding Christ given all power and authority and conquered sin as itself, as a whole, on the cross.
Yes.
It changed me.
Yeah.
It changed me.
And he gives you his righteousness, not yours. Right. He doesn't make you have the ability to now be a good guy. He is the good guy in you.
There we go. And that's
powerful.
Yes.
Powerful.
Yes.
I mean, it's the difference. It's really the difference. And so, the power of the gospel changed you. You did well in the program. You're obviously a minister intern now. What would you say, minus, and I hate to say it that way, but minus your relationship with Christ, as far as going through the program, what else did you find as far as how the program's done at Brother Brian that was conducive, let's say, to your experience being positive? I know it's been positive. But...
So I would say the relationships with the men.
Okay.
And the relationships with the chaplains here.
Okay.
I have spoken here recently of what that experience has been like and what the command is of God for us and what the calling is within those relationships, and to love God first and foremost, and for us to love each other as Jesus did. Now, at the end of every day, I know my failures within that.
Sure.
So I'm not speaking
thank
of
God it's
that.
not based on that.
There we go. And so I'm not mentioning that as if that is something that I do. I'm mentioning that as something that I strive for. And that has been a major compelling factor of what I've learned and how I've carried myself here in the program.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you decided to become an in-ministry intern. What was like, so that's a little different. I'll ask that question. So what about that really attracted you to get and be a ministry intern?
Because the Great Commission and what the calling is on my life.
So like, here's a for me to step right into this thing.
Yes,
right now. I said, right now they have this opportunity. I'm gonna take it.
That's right. Because
that's good.
So I feel like I can go present myself, and I have done it in the past to go get a job.
Sure.
When I think about that, I do have a fear that stepping back into the world, I could be sidetracked or actually backslide into, things that
the flesh is powerful,
absolutely, and very much still there.
For sure.
Yeah. And so I would like to. I would like to say that the best and first and foremost focus would be to give back to the other men like I've received, but also the knowledge and continuing learning.
We get stronger in this thing, right? That our faith goes deeper in its application, and we help other men do it. I mean, God, I found that too, David, that God's rigged the system that he gives me in order to give it out.
That's right.
And if I just keep it to myself, then I kind of lose it. But if I give it away, I get to keep it. I get to see it grow in other people, but I also get to keep it. And so he rigged the system. He did it. I'm going to give you something so you get somebody else so you guys connect, and I'm glorified. So, I think that's kind of what it sounds like you're speaking to. That's good. So let me ask you this. There's men that are thinking about coming to the program. They hear your story. It's impacting them. They're saying, hey, can this happen to me? What would you say to those guys that maybe watch this, or their family members who's like are looking for some solution to the problems like you and I have had in our lives, and saying, this is what we're looking for? What would you say to that guy?
So in my experience in life, it began at a very young age where my mom actually put me in the hospital when I was 9 years old, thinking that there may be some kind of mental health disorder. And I think I was prescribed Ritalin or Prozac or something like that. And so here's what I've come to find is that, and through my life, there's been different diagnoses and different problems, anger, dealing with all of these different things. I found a healing for those things in Jesus. Which led me to a better understanding is that when you set aside those things, regardless, we can all be diagnosed with different things. We can all experience different things. We can all experience different levels of struggle. But the root cause and what we are born into is that brokenness, right?
That sin,
And I think that if we are to have that understanding of, with a Christ-centered solution, that the other things that you may have been experiencing you would find healing in that.
Either you'll be outright healed, or it's going to be a catalyst, that your relationship with Christ will be a catalyst for you to seek and receive healing in the natural.
Right.
God heals in many different ways. We pray for that miraculous healing where he just takes the thing away. He changes the thing in the moment. He does do that. Praise be to him. But there's also where he uses, different things, medications, whatever. Yeah, that's good. All right, and so what would you say to that guy? What would you tell that guy that's struggling to think, should I come here or not?
I would say that I was there also at one time, and that you get to a certain place where you understand that the struggle that I'm going is not something that I can beat on my own. That
you need help.
Yes, you need help.
Divine help.
Yes.
Yes, for sure. All right, and then what would you say to those people that volunteer here, that either volunteer to teach classes, that come to serve dinners, that support us financially, prayerfully? What would you say to those community that are part of the Brother Brian team, even though some of them may not be faces that we get to see, but they're definitely a vital part? What would you say to those folks that are going to end up watching this interview?
I would say there's a level of gratitude that I couldn't possibly express, and give the strength behind my expression of gratitude. It has changed my life. I've had the experience here to work in the clothes closet, in the kitchen, in these different areas where the things that are donated and the different things that are done to help us in provision, along with what men do need in this radical change that's going on in their life, is irreplaceable.
It's vital.
Yes.
We couldn't do it without them.
That's right.
Let's be honest. I mean,
that's right.
We're 100% donor driven. I mean, let's be honest. We don't take government funding. we really are relying on people to donate in whatever capacities, whether it's mom and pop, we call it, where it's like small donations to these big, these sometimes inheritance, whatever people do, how they do
Right.
these things. People have done this since the beginning of this mission, and it carries forward. And so, yeah, what you're speaking to is an appreciation for that, and it's vital, it's impactful, it's necessary, and we definitely appreciate them. And ask for those that want to get involved to just reach out to Brother Brian Mission and talk to our executive director, and he'll point them in the best way that we can that they can help out. Well, man, that's going to conclude this episode of Enter the Mission podcast. I thank David for showing up and giving us a story. I hope you were edified and encouraged by it, and I pray that God blesses you mightily. Until next time, peace.